Well, hey there, kiddos. Here's your video on solving multi-step equations for the first day. We're going to do a second day of this next week, but we're going to solve some equations. So we're just going to start simple and just solve some equations, and then we're going to move on to actual word problems for these. I am not going to do every problem that is right here in your notes. I'm going to skip around and do the ones I feel are the most important. If you want to go back and work the ones I didn't, just to get a better understanding, that would be great, but you do not have to. So let's start with this number 1. I've got negative 4.6 equals j plus a negative 2.5. The reason this problem is important, it's not really a multi-step equation. It's a single-step equation, except it has to be rewritten. This plus a negative. I don't like double signs in my equations. It's confusing. It's hard to tell, are you supposed to add a positive? Am I supposed to subtract a negative? What am I supposed to do here? So I'm going to rewrite this so this side only has one sign. If we remember integer rules, one positive and one negative makes a negative. So this is really negative 4.6 is equal to j minus 2.5. That positive and that negative go together and just make a minus sign. Now I know what to do. To get j by itself, I have to add 2.5 to both sides. And when I do that, I get that j equals negative 2.1. And so it really was a single step equation, but getting that down so you have just one sign, that's what's important for that one. So look at number 2. Number 2 looks like it has a fraction. You've got negative x over 8 equals 3.9. Remember, this means division. And if I want to get rid of dividing by 8, then that means I'm going to multiply by 8. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 8. So over here on the left, my 8's cancel, leaving me with negative x is equal to 31.2. And now I have this negative in front of this x. I'm not done because you aren't finished solving until you have a positive x remaining by itself. This negative in front of this x is the same thing as saying I have a negative 1x right here. The 1 is just invisible. We don't write it. And so to get x by itself, I would divide everything by negative 1. And so when I do that, I get that x is equal to negative 31.2. Number 3 is very similar. It's got a fraction involved in it. It's got 5/9 x equals negative 10, and I would treat it just like I did number 2. I'm going to multiply both sides by 9 first so that I can clear out the fraction, so get rid of those. So I have 5x is equal to negative 90, and then I can divide both sides by 5, getting that x equals negative 18. Now number 4 is different than number 3 only because everything's being divided by 4. And so the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that divided by 4. I want the fraction, that denominator, to go away. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 4. And that leaves me, because my 4's cancel, with an x minus 7 here. And this becomes negative 8 when I multiply by 4. And so to finish solving, I'm going to add 7 to both sides. And now I get that x equals negative 1. Now I'm going to skip here down to number 6. I'll come back to number 5, I promise. But number 6 is different from number 4. If you see in number 4, x minus 7, the whole thing is being divided by 4. Over here in number 6, I have n divided by 7, then plus 2. This plus 2 is not being divided by 7. So up here in number 4, the first thing I did was clear out the denominator. Number 6, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this plus 2. It's hanging out off to the side away from the fraction, so it has to go first. Then I will deal with the fraction and get rid of that denominator. So first thing here, I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. And so I have n divided by 7 is equal to 0. And now I'll do like I did over here with these, and I will multiply both sides by 7 to clear that denominator out. And when I do that, I get that n is equal to 0. Now number 5 is a little different. I have two different fractions. I've got negative 5/8 and positive 5/4, but there's an addition sign going on in between them. It's plus x, and so I don't really have to clear my fraction. You can if you want to, but I'm not going to worry about that. All I want to do is just solve the equation. So it's addition and subtraction. It's addition with fractions, which means I've got to have a common denominator. So step 1, I've got to give this 5/4 a common denominator. Common denominator is 8, so I'm going to multiply everything by 2. So this becomes negative 5/8 x, plus x, is equal to 10 over 8. Now I just have a basic equation. Yes, it's got fractions, that's okay. I'm going to get rid of this negative 5/8 so I can get x by itself, and to do that I have to do a positive or add 5/8. That is the opposite, it makes them cancel. I'll add 5/8 over here, and since they have a common denominator, it's real easy. X becomes 10 plus 5 is 15 over 8. Please do not go back to junior high and decide that you need to go do all of that fancy stuff and make this a mixed number. It's an improper fraction. It's okay. You can leave it. Don't take that extra step and do that extra work. Just stop. 15 over 8 is fine. So now look at number 7 here. So Kristen solved an equation and then give you an equation, and we just want to know what does step 2 look like. So if she goes from step 1 to step 2, what is going to have to happen? Well, she's going to have to distribute this negative 2 to both things inside this parentheses. So that's what we'll do. Negative 2 times 4x becomes negative 8x. And negative 2 times 3 becomes negative 6. The right-hand side stays the same, so it's equal to 6x minus 12. And so step 2 of the equation looks like that. Now we are going to skip number 8. Well, not completely. We're going to set it up, but we are not going to solve it. The reason being is that when you solve it, the answer doesn't make any sense. But we will set it up so you can see what it's supposed to look like. So you got a hairstylist deciding where to open her own studio. If she chooses location A, she'll pay $1,200 per month in rent and will charge $45 per haircut. If she chooses location B, she'll pay $18 per month in rent and will charge $600 per haircut. Sorry, $60 per haircut. How many haircuts would she have to give in 1 month to make the same profit at either location? And so I want them to be equal. That's what the words the same mean. So location A needs to equal location B. So for location A, it's a $1,200 per month rent, and we're assuming we're working with 1 month here. And then $45 for each haircut. Needs to be the same as location B, which is $1,800 rent and $60 per haircut. So that's how you would set it up. We'll discuss how to solve these later when we run into more of them, but for now just set it up. Plus I have worked this one and the answer makes no sense at all. So now let's talk about these things called consecutive integers. Consecutive integers are nothing more than integers that are in counting order. And so they're in the order that you would say them if you were counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are consecutive. There's 3 types of consecutive integer problems. There's just plain old consecutive integers, which are the same definition as above. They're integers in counting order. For example, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And the symbols we use when we're dealing with just plain old consecutive integers, the first one is always going to be in. The next one is going to be in plus 1 because it's 1 away. 1 plus 1 makes 2. And then the next one is in plus 2 because 1 plus 2 makes 3, and so on, and you keep going. In plus 4, in plus 5, whatever you need. Consecutive even and consecutive odd integers are very similar, except that one is even and one is odd. So consecutive even integers are even integers in order. It's like you're counting by 2s when you're doing even integers. So it's like 2, 4, 6, and so on. And so that's how it goes. It's just the even numbers, and so you skip 1. And so when you write your symbols for those, the first one is still in. That will always be the case with the consecutive integers. But then the next one becomes in plus 2 because 2 plus 2 makes 4. You had to skip the number 3, and so you have to add 2. And then to get to the next one, it would be in plus 4, and so on. Consecutive odd integers work almost exactly the same, except they're odd numbers. So they're odd integers that are in order. For example, 1, 3, 5, and you keep going that way. But the symbols are the same because you're still skipping a number to get from one to the next. And so it's still in n plus 2 and n plus 4. So keep this table in front of you to keep it handy to help you be able to set up your equation. So like number 9. tells us that the sum of 3 consecutive odd integers is negative 51. Write and solve an equation that represents the situation and find the integers. There are 2 ways to find the integers with these consecutive odd, when it's consecutive odd or consecutive even. There's 2 ways to do it. I'm going to show you both so that you can see it. But the first thing we're going to do is write an equation, because my directions say define a variable, write an equation. That has to happen. Well, to define a variable, I've given them to you up here. They're n plus 2 and n plus 4. The n is the number, so we've done that. And I know that I'm dealing with a sum, and I have 3 odd integers, all in an order. Well, I've got my things up here. The first one is n. It's a sum, so I'm adding. The second one is n plus 2. I'm going to add. The third one is n plus 4. So I have 1, 2, 3 integers is equal to negative 51. Well, let's simplify this equation, because that's kind of icky for solving. So I have 1, 2, 3 n's total. And then when I add my numbers, 2 plus 4 is 6. So this is really 3n plus 6 equals negative 51. So there's 2 ways to find my integers. Way number 1, take your equation, 3n plus 6 equals negative 51, and let's solve it. So we're going to subtract 6 from both sides, which gives us 3n is equal to negative 57. And then divide both sides by 3, and you get that n is equal to negative 19. Well, that's your first integer. Your second one is n plus 2. So that means my n plus 2 integer is negative 17. And then my next one, n plus 4, is negative 15. And so I have 3 integers in a row, negative 15, negative 17, negative 19. So there's my 3 consecutive odd integers. That's way number 1 to solve. Grab your equation, just solve it. The second way to do this is to take what you know their sum is, which is negative 51, and divide it by how many integers there are supposed to be. I'm supposed to have 3 of them. And so if you take negative 51 and divide it by 3, you get negative 17. And if you'll look, that was our middle integer right here. So if you take your sum and divide it by how many integers there are, it will give you the number in the middle. Well, since we're dealing with odd integers, that one's odd, we're good. This is the one in the middle. So I've got to have one that's bigger and one that's smaller to get them all 3 in a row. So that's the other way to do it. Find the one in the middle and then add and subtract to get your other 2. I don't care which way you solve. Both of them work. This strategy is faster, but remember that you have to do this part. You will have to write the equation no matter what. That's the goal of what we're trying to do, is to be able to write the equation. So number 10, another consecutive integer problem. It says the ages of 3 brothers are consecutive integers. These are just regular consecutive integers with the sum of 96. I have 3 of them, and they're just regular consecutive integers, so it's the first line in my table. So I have 3 brothers. The first one is n. The second one will be n plus 1. And the third one will be n plus 2. And I'm adding them because it tells me there's a sum of 96. Let's simplify our expression down. I have 1, 2, 3n plus 3 by adding my 1 and my 2 is equal to 96. And then we're going to solve to find out how old the brothers are. So I have 3n plus 3 equals 96. I'm going to subtract 3. And I have 3n is equal to 93. And then I will divide by 3 on both sides. When I divide by 3, I get that n is equal to 31. So the first brother is 31. The second brother is 32. And the third brother is 33. And so now I know how old all the brothers are. Now this trick up here will also work. It's just a little different with consecutive integers. I take my sum of 96 and I divide it by 3 because there's 3 brothers. And that gives me 32. Well, that's the brother in the middle. So the younger brother's 31, the older brother's 33. All right, number 11 here is complementary supplementary. It's a complementary question. It tells you that angle M and angle Q are complementary, which, as you remember, is 90 degrees. I have to add them together. Tells you that angle M measures 2.5x degrees and angle Q is 2x degrees. So I got to find the measures of the two. Well, angle M plus angle Q have to equal 90 degrees. That's what I know because they're complementary. M is 2.5x, Q is 2x, and together they make 90 degrees. So now I'm going to simplify. I'm going to put these together. 2 plus 2.5 makes 4.5x equals 90. So to find out what x equals, I'm going to divide by 4.5. And that tells me that x is 20. That's not what I want to know. If you look up here, it asks for the measures of M and Q. Well, the measure of angle M is 2.5 times x. So I've got to take what I know about x and plug it in. So I have to do 2.5 times 20, which gives me 50. And so angle M is 50 degrees. Well, I know they have to be 90, so that means angle Q is going to be 40 degrees. If you want to be for sure, we'll plug it in. Angle Q is equal to 2x, so I'll plug in my 20. 2 times 20, that definitely gives me 40. So there are your two angles, 50 and 40 degrees. All right, I want you to look at number 13. It's an average question. And it's important because the average questions are kind of a big deal. The setting up of them is important. So Ashlyn's scores on her last 4 algebra tests were 82, 86, 91, and 96. We want to know what Ashlyn needs to make on her 5th test to get an average of 90. Well, to find an average, remember, you add up everything and divide by how many there are. So we have 4 tests, 82, 86, 91, and 96, plus test number 5. We don't know what test number 5 is, so we could just call it X if you wanted to, but we got to add test number 5 in there. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tests, so I've got to divide by 5. And she wants her average to be a 90. So let's simplify. Let's add these numbers together so that I have a little bit easier thing to look like. So I had 82 plus 86 plus 91 plus 96. That gives me 355 plus test number 5, which I'm calling X, divided by 5 equals 90. Well, this looks like those equations I solved at the very beginning. I've got a whole bunch of stuff divided by 5. Let's get rid of that 5 because I don't like having a denominator. So multiply both sides by 5. So I have 355 plus x is equal to 450. Well, if I want to know what her 5th test needs to be, I've got to subtract this 355 from both sides. And so Ashlyn needs to make a 95 on her 5th test to get an A average. So let's look at number 14. Julie went shopping at Target and pays 8% sales tax on her total bill. If she paid $6.06 in sales tax, what was her bill before tax? Well, so here's what I know. Her total bill, we need to know how much she paid before tax. I know that it was 8%. Remember, that's 0.08 as a decimal. To figure out her sales tax, I would take how much she spent, X, and multiply it times 0.08. I need to figure out how much she spent. That's what I want to know. I know that if I did that, it was $6.06. I'm not adding the bill back to the tax because they only told me how much sales tax she made. We don't know what her total bill was. So we don't need to worry about adding the rest of it to it. We just want to find out what X was before sales tax. So I'm going to divide both sides by 0.08. And when I do that, I get that her bill before tax was $75.75. All right, we're going to do one last one, and then you can go back and look at the rest of them if you need to and ask questions when you come to class. So number 16, if the mean of 6.6, 12, 16, and x is equal to x, what's the value of x? Well, so the mean, remember, means average. So it's like our question with the test score. So I have 6.6 plus 12 plus 16 plus x. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers. And it's equal to x. I got to find out what x equals. Well, let's simplify by adding our numbers up. So I have 6.6 plus 12 plus 16. So I end up with 34.6 plus x divided by 4 is equal to x. Well, I got to clear out that denominator by multiplying both sides by 4. So I have 34.6 plus x is equal to 4x. Well, now I've got x's on the left and x's on the right. I want to get them all together on the same side. The way I always do it, it's not the only way to do it, but it's the easiest way in my opinion, is to take the small one and move it to the big one. So I always move the baby over to the mama. Well, the smaller value of x is this x, because 1x is less than 4x. So I'm going to subtract x from here to cancel it, which means I also have to do that over here. And so I'm left with 34.6 is equal to 3x, because 4x minus 1x makes 3x. And then I'll divide both sides by 3. And so I get, and it's a yucky number, x is equal to 11.5, and the 3 repeats, but we'll just round it off and we'll call it 5.33. So that's what x would equal. So there is solving multi-step equations the first day. If you have questions about any of the ones I skipped, just bring them with you when you come to class, and I will see you guys tomorrow.